Welcome, friends. This is a special edition of the Education is Power podcast, broadcast, whatever you want to call it. This is very special because I'm not really the host by myself today. This is a special edition because we have Jay Wamsted, educator, friend of the show, former guest. Last time he was here, we had a clip of Jay that we put out from our discussion on the internets. In that clip, Jay asked me, I think it was a question that went something like, would you rather have a teacher who's not culturally competent but really good with pedagogy versus a teacher who is not really good with pedagogy but is totally culturally competent? It was something like that. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if I got it. Probably got it wrong.
It was something like that.
Something like that. But people had feelings about it. I got some feedback. You got some feedback. And it made me think, you know what? For all this talking that I do, I don't really understand white educators very much. And they confuse me. Thus, this show was born. We're calling it White Noise. So, Jay, how's that for a setup?
It's a great setup. I mean, that was I thought a simple conversation we had, and it did not go over as simply on the internet as I think we both thought it would.
Yes. So, what was the issue, do you think, in that question? Like when people were responding to you, they wanted you almost to apologize, I think, for the question. And I didn't understand why.
Well, I definitely understood talking to a lot of people that the quote out of context, I think people took some disagreement with the thought that one could be this really amazing teacher yet also be a racist, and that kind of any racist white person would kind of naturally just not be a good teacher. And I understand that sentiment in the abstract. I certainly think that any white teacher that is racist is a much worse teacher than they could be if they would deal with their own racism. That's for sure. But I think I want to pass that back to you. Do you have a problem with the sentence, a white teacher could be halfway decent and still be a racist?
Well, see, I think the difference would be decent if I replace the word decent with effective.
Okay. Yeah. Effective.
Yeah.
Sure.
And if I just meant by effective, if I just meant being able to help kids get to proficiency. So it's a very low bar. It's not a high bar that I'm looking for, but we're not even meeting that high bar right now. Right.
Yeah.
So we don't even, we have a nationwide problem where a majority of kids of color are not making that basic bar. So if there's a teacher that was really effective that could get you there, but she also happens to be like a Trump voter or something like that, I'm not going to invite her over for coffee or tea or whatever people do. We're not going to have drinks or anything anytime soon. But damn, I mean, if she could, versus the teacher that has the Black Lives Matter T-shirt and the picture of Martin Luther King on the wall, and is reading lots of woke stuff on the weekend, but the kids aren't learning. And
I mean, I definitely I think throwing that Trump voter thing is a good thing in there. I think there's something to be said for these educators that claim to love Black and brown children, but also could vote for Trump on November, whatever it's called. There's something deeply flawed there, in their psyche, soul, something. But to say that I don't know. I don't know, Chris. I don't want to get in trouble again by making.
See, you're scared already, man.
The internet will get you, man. The internet will get you.
Well, that's not what we were going to talk about tonight, anyways. I mean, we have this other topic that we wanted to talk about. I just wanted to set it up that way to say people felt some kind of way about it, and it made me get to thinking. As I was reading through it, I didn't have a frame of reference for what white people were talking about in that thread, why you should apologize, why the question was so wrong to even ask. I do think what you just said, a lot of it was out of context. If you had watched everything leading up to the question, they may not have responded to you the same way.
Yeah. I felt like you and I were just kind of having an abstract conversation about some things about I remember we're just talking about hypothetical school and hypothetical trainings, and I think the thing is though is that what this got at is that white teachers matter because there's so many of us, and the white teachers that are really working on this anti-racism, the trauma-informed education, I think they are onto something. We are onto something because we gotta fix white teachers in the short term. Like we can't just, it's not enough to just say, get the racists out. I mean, I can post something every once in a while and someone just goes, well, get rid of all the racist teachers. And that is a wonderful sentiment, but that's not going to happen anytime in the short term. We got to try to figure out a way to like fix white teachers. And I think that's that's my goal. That's the people I was talking to's goal. I just think something in our communication got crossed up last time. So.
Well, we're going to talk more about this issue that I think is interesting that you raised with me. And there's this concept called white fragility, and it's a book written by a corporate communications expert, I think, or a DEI expert.
Yeah.
And in the book, it's Robin DiAngelo is the author, and many people have read this book and taken to heart much of what it says. I think the premise of the book, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that anti-Blackness or racism is somewhat of a permanent condition within white folks. And white folks are trained from childhood to not see themselves as a race, to see themselves as kind of like the default person, like the universal default person. So it's weird to them to think about racial differences. And it's why you get things like comments like, I don't see color.
Right.
Which Robin in the book sees as problematic of a statement as any that you could make. So why do you raise this issue around white fragility? Why are we talking about this tonight?
Well, so white fragility is, I'm starting about a month ago. It's turned into the go-to book for the base zero white person that wants to learn something, and it's a good book. I have it right here. Okay, this is what it looks like. I've read the book. I have marked the book. Like it is a good book. So this is not a white fragility bashing section. Although I sometimes get in trouble on Twitter because I do kind of use it as a punching bag, in terms of it's just kind of a symbol for. Sometimes it turns into a symbol for white people for like level zero. It's a performative thing. Like we would take a picture of us holding white fragility, we read it, and then we can move on because we read it. The reason you and I are talking about today, I think, is because that John McWhorter piece came out last week, and that's not his issue with it at all, or that's part of it, I suppose. But his issue is, from what I understand, is that he considers the book to be more or less racist towards Black people. That he considers the whole notion, or at least the way it's carried out in the book, to be racist.
Which is weird. It's just a weird philosophy. I listened to the clip that you sent me of him talking, and then I read this article that I just put up a minute ago in Atlantic a couple of times over. Let's get to that, but let's start with the performative part. You have a white teacher who sincerely wants to do better in the classroom, sincerely wants to be better next week. So that's the reason teacher is reading in the first place and is seeking out answers, buys that book, reads it, comes away thinking, okay, I got some inner work to do as a white person in the classroom. What's wrong with that scenario?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it as long as the learning keeps going. This is a continuation of a long line of books written by white people for white people that come out every so often, and they all say important things, but they're kind of like re-saying the same things, and it's like a generation of white people are discovering our whiteness and our complicity in race. We discover it anew every 5 to 7 years, and until the next book comes out, and then we read that and we discover it again. Again, it is a good book. It is a good book, and it nails some wonderful things about the problem with white people and talking to white people about race and racism. And I recommend I think all white people should read it. I mean, like it's all over Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Like, read White Fragility. White people should read it. But it's you got to go past page 182, and it's not even 182. It's only like 130 pages. You got to go past page 130 and get to the next book or the next 10 books.
What's the big takeaway out of that book that you think helps a person be better? That would help a white teacher be better?
Well, so I think what you said is so true about white teachers, white people, but white teachers, like we're by proxy, we have college degrees. We tend to come from the middle class. We tend to be a little better educated than the average American. The average, only 40% of Americans have college degrees, or 50, or whatever it is. So white teachers we're a little more educated. We come from the middle class. We're coming from that space of people, the white people, that have tried to put race away, right? And we've tried to hide it away, and especially Obama got elected, and we really sealed things for us, that it was going to all be good now. And especially the last 4 years, but if you were paying attention, even when Obama was in office, the last 12 years have proven that that's not to be the case, right? But the premise of the book is that white people have developed all kinds of evasive actions and communication to get out of talking about racism. And D'Angelo just does a really good job of getting into what it is white people do wrong in conversations about race, and what it is that we can do right, and how we can do better, and how we can kind of escape that trap of just getting caught being angry about race or being defensive about race. So it is, if you're going to read a book alone, it's a good book to read because it'll give you some tools.
Sounds like you're saying, though, it's not the end all be all. It's not the thing like, I read it over the weekend, I'm woke now, I'm good.
It's just short on, it's short on scholarship. It's really short on history. It's short on a lot of the stuff that goes into we're educators. It's short on the stuff that goes into the structures that make up the school building, which inform the racism that informs the structure of American schooling. And it's not an education book, so it's not supposed to be doing that, but it's not.
All right. So let me ask you a question about this.
Yeah.
This is where I get to talk to a real live white educator. We're going to talk across difference. You're my co-host on this. So, how is it that you get to be a whole ass person as a white American who does get through 12 years of high school, 4 to 6 years of college? I'm sure there's a social issues class of some sort, or an anthropology class of some sort, or a social science class of some sort. How do you get a whole ass white person in a classroom with that much education that needs like a re-education on the history of race and how race shows up in the building and in their lives? Like, how do you get that far? And need more education? Because you just said it, like, you're probably more educated by that point when you get to the classroom than much of the American public.
Yeah. Well, the system's broke, so that's the short answer to that. The long answer is that I don't know. I mean, I'm 44, so I'm not too old. I'm not too young. I'm sure people that are 20 years younger than me going into the teaching career could maybe speak to some difference. But I went to really segregated schools that were segregated not de jure, but just de facto, the way they tracked black kids and white kids in the different places. And I went to a big state school. I went to UGA, which entirely underrepresents the black population of Georgia, like in a massive way. I don't know the numbers offhand, but if 30% of Georgia's black, or 50% or something close to that, something like 4% of UGA is black. So that's a incredible underrepresentation. I don't remember a single black person that was in my cohort of people that I graduated with as a math major. I didn't have a black male teacher until I was in my PhD program at the age of 30.
Wow.
I recently realized that. So I had taught with black male teachers by that point, but I'd never learned under one. And I don't know, the media just, it's how the system runs. Like if we can just keep everybody kind of happy with their consumers and capitalisms and stay in our lane, then we're going to be all right. And like a real addressing of race and racism necessarily mixes up with a real addressing of economics and the terrible history of this country in terms of our economic exploitation. And so just it's easier to keep it out. And it was kept out for me. And not through I had good liberal parents, and I was a good little liberal my whole life. I mean, I voted for Clinton in '96, the first chance I got.
And that kind of was like, when you say the performative things, I'm not going to say that voting for Clinton or voting for Obama is performative, because it's your worldview, it's your politics. But I will say this, voting the right way, talking the right way at cocktail parties about supporting public education. Like, I totally support public education. I support the teachers. There are a lot of these things that you can do as kind of like markers that mark you as one of the good guys. Like, but it doesn't feel like it's the real work. I have this tough issue with white educators who become so, I think, like, my babies need more food, and I'm there for my kids, and my kids this, and I call them my kids, and that and the other. And then along comes someone like me who's like pushing something that is, not in your political worldview, something like school choice, something like, maybe some of your babies need to get out of your classroom and get into another classroom. And then all kind of like woke understanding falls out the damn conversation. It's just like over with at that point. And I don't get it. I don't understand it, because I think when we try to liberate kids of color from mainline traditional public schools, some of our biggest fight is with progressive white people.
Yeah. And I would argue that those progressive white people need to, they have some liberation to do for themselves first, that I think most of them, I agree with you. I don't, it's a terrible thing we're this place in this country where whole ass white people are walking around without having thought too much about this, but it's true. And it is. And so we've got some liberatory work to do on ourselves before we can hear you talk about liberation of Black children, because we don't have a grid for that. Like, it offends us. And that's what's good about white fragility, is that it kind of gives you some tracks to run on, some language about why white people, even good white liberals, get offended when somebody wants to like call something racism or racist, even if it's not them, but like to say that, oh, this classroom structure, school structure is racist, like it can offend a white liberal real fast. But
yeah, why is that? Like, I always like, I've heard,
we're so fragile. We're so fragile.
I've heard white people say like being called a racist is the worst thing ever. And I'm like, no, actually being a racist is worse than being called a racist, I think. But it does seem like it's almost like I just see things like saying something is racist is like saying it's raining outside. Yeah. Like, either it is or it isn't. Like, it's raining. I can see very clearly the water's hitting the ground. So for someone who's calling out racism, it just feels like, second nature. No, that's racism. Like,
well, I was reading this just today. Kind of the that quote, the biggest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
That's Unusual Suspects.
Yeah,
from that movie. Yes. Yeah.
It's actually it's this old French poem that they took it from. Just in case there's somebody out there that was about to, I don't want them to cancel us for not knowing that.
They're gonna come after me. Yeah. Cancel.
But it's so I was just reading today about how Nixon once so he won the presidency in 1968. And by that point, it was clear that the South had lost the war against Brown v. Board, right? At that point, it's like schools had, crazily, grudgingly integrated, and we got through, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act had all happened by 1968. And that what Nixon did is he reframed, it's not Nixon himself, but him and his administration, his policy, coming back to what you just said, is they reframed racism as Ku Klux Klanners. They reframed racism as the actual guy that bombed the church in Birmingham. They reframed racism as the man who shot Martin Luther King. So when those people are racist, like 99% of white people get to throw up our hands and go, "Oh, I'm not racist." And so we're living in the legacy of that now. I mean, those are my parents that were teenagers in that time. And so now we're in a place where we don't have a grid we white people don't have a grid for racism because we think it's Kluxers and James Earl Ray or whatever,
Yeah, it's got to be something pretty, like you just said, burning crosses and stuff is racist. So if I'm calling you a racist for something that is like some things people will describe as a microaggression.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of like a sneeze of racism. It's kind of like, racism is the nose, and that was a sneeze. Like,
that's a great,
it's still racism. You call it a microaggression if you want to. You don't have to be burning crosses out there. There's a lot of things. Matter of fact, this is one thing that I'm interested with white folks in knowing is, are they aware of all the little things that they do that are within their privilege to do that are not burning crosses, but are what we call microaggressions? Do they catch themselves on that sometime? Oh, I shouldn't have said that like that, or I shouldn't have done that like that, or whatnot. Or is it like a complete just not knowing?
So, I mean, I don't want to like speak for all white people as monoliths.
Oh, you got to do it, man. You're all white people right now. On this show, you're all white people. So you're the president of white people right now.
So I will say there's definitely like, I think there are a lot, this is what I will say is, and I can back this up with data buried in documents. There are a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned, talented teachers and doctors and lawyers and just folks out there living their lives that have these microaggressive sneezes and have no idea that they're doing it. And I think those people are reachable. I think they're reachable. And so now there are people, we can talk more about these people that are not reachable. There are people that are like heavily invested in active racism. There are people that are heavily invested in just the denial of race altogether. D'Angelo says that one of the pillars of white fragility, I love this phrase, is the refusal to know. She calls it the refusal to know. And I've run across so many white people that just refuse to know. They don't want to hear about it. It's like, stick your hands in your ears and move on. But I think a lot of white people are in that side that they do want to know. But no, Chris, we don't. For the large part, we don't know that like that this or that is touchy or offensive or upsetting or ugly.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of teachers, or I don't know if I need a number to say a lot isn't, but do you think it's an issue that white teachers might believe because they dedicate themselves to teaching Black children, that's evidence enough that they're not racist?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that. I mean, I was definitely like that. I would have co-signed that. I'm not sure I would have said it at 30 or 31. I started teaching at 30, all Black classroom, but I definitely would have co-signed that sentence up until my mid 30s. Like, how could I be racist? This is where I teach here because I want to. I love my job. I love coming here every day. I'm happy, and I did. I loved all those things. I was happy, but like, how could there be racism anywhere in this? Because I'm here, right? And that's a real silly attitude. But I do think a lot of people fall prey to it.
Here's a weird question. Do you think it's different for white men and white women in the field? Is there something to the Black boy, white woman dynamic in teaching? This is very much in teaching. Be clear about my question. Yeah. Versus the white male, Black boy dynamic, or however you want to mix up the genders. But do you think that there's a difference? There's fewer white men teachers for sure. We often talk about this as a white female problem, I think, in the field. Yeah. Do you think that there's a difference in the interactions?
Be hard. I'm not sure I'm ready to qualify to answer that. I mean, what do you think the numbers on just white women versus white men teaching anyway? I mean,
I think it's like, isn't it like 11%? It's not very like it's mostly white women.
Right. It's like
70 and something. Yeah.
80% are white.
Yeah.
Almost all of those are white women. I mean, like maybe 70% women, 10% men, something like that. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. I will say that I think certainly like the what you're talking about with like the black I hate to use the term, even say black boy, because that has, like, I try to avoid that in my writing and speaking altogether, but you said
Yeah,
it.
we don't have to be over woke on the podcast here.
I don't think that's over woke. I don't think that's over woke.
I said black boy because there are black boys in schools right now who are being taught by white women, and there is a long history of the dynamic between that grouping, that coupling, all the way back to Frederick Douglass, who talks about how the mistress was with him, in the house, right? Like, there's a difference between the master and the mistress. And right now our schools are full of mistresses, but there's a history to that dynamic. And from my point of view, and from the research point of view, that dynamic might be result in differences in how many black boys are assigned to gifted and talented programs, how many of them are sent for infractions to the office or whatever. But the same infraction from maybe a white girl wouldn't be taken the same way because that white girl is closest to a white woman teacher. And they can empathize in that dynamic. They can't maybe empathize with the black student.
And I probably, it seems to me that, like, men and women would react, white men and white women would react pretty, it would be probably about the same. I mean, we talked about this last time, that study about how white people, like, age up black faces or whatever. Didn't we talk about that?
They do, how they see black boys as older than they actually are.
Yeah. Right. And girls too. I mean, that's a part of this too, is the how do I phrase this? The early sexualization of black females, like that's a thing in social science too, and that white men are just as guilty of that as anything else. So anyway, so I don't know. I think white people, like,
you think it's equal. You think it's about the same. Yeah. And they both have a history. So how is someone going to call out racism in schools? If you're trying to build bridges and create allies and talk across difference, like, what's going to be the way that we approach the fact that schools are a racist institution, right? And maybe you don't like it being said, because you had a great experience as a child. The system was built for you, and you had if you got through college and came back to teach, chances are you had a good experience in this institution. Your memories of it are good. I imagine the people who lived on plantations during slavery had fond memories of their time on the plantation, right? Because you're
really going for it here. This is
well, I mean, okay, you think that's too far? I mean, but you want to talk across difference, because on one side, the black side, just, I'm speaking for myself, but it's just obvious that it's a racist system, that it's not lovely, and it's not all the things that people who had a good experience in it think it is. It's not the cornerstone of democracy. As a matter of fact, it's been against democracy its entire time in existence. It's always sorted kids between the ones that would go to the ruling class and the ones that wouldn't. It's always been it has never been an equalizer. It has equalized the Polish and the Irish and the Italians into white people. That was the sausage that it made, and keep everybody else black, right? And held them back in a lot of ways. But you bring it up and you get kind of a reflex, you might get some agreement. I guess I shouldn't say all white educators are the same on that. Some of them will agree with you in part, but in the back of their mind, they're still saying, yeah, but. Yeah, I know that that's the way it was for you guys, or for you, but I still basically think the institution is good.
Yeah, I mean, that's, sure, that's us. We're coming. I mean, most of us wanted to be teachers before we were even out of high school or college, right? I mean, we made that decision early. I mean, I was 19 I didn't teach till I was 30, but I was 19 the first time I thought, yeah, I could probably be a teacher when I grow up. Like, that shows a lot of fondness for the building.
You took a while to come back.
That's a different story.
You took a while until 30 to come back. Yeah, it seems like a hard one to me to reconcile when you're talking about the same thing. It's like a Rorschach thing, I see a very different picture than what you see, and we're supposed to describe the same thing when we talk to each other. The only difference is my kid is in your care, your kid isn't in my care. So I think that's what makes it a little bit different.
No, that's a really big thing for you. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm gonna say over and over again, like we've got to reach white teachers, and we're not gonna reach them all, but we got to reach some. I mean, like we've got to figure out a way to get in there and affect change. And last time the reason we got off on that little tangent before is we got hung up in the thought of like PD or trainings or, and I'm not advocating for that or disadvocating for that. That's not a panacea. That's not gonna fix everything. I'm not quite sure what it is. I do think if every teacher that read White Fragility this summer, like went back, well, we're not going to go back to buildings in the same way, but if we all go back into our spaces and like share that book with some other white teacher, and I really think there's a multiplicative effect there that could like be beneficial. I'm optimistic in that way. That maybe I bet you're not.
Well, I can imagine that teacher going into a school with colleagues who are not at all interested or ready for it, or older, or have been around longer, and kind of look at that teacher as, oh God, here you come again. You're one of them. You're one of those types. You know, you can seem like the real eager beaver, like running up to school with the White Fragility book and saying, hey, let's have a book club. If you're not in a building that's like with colleagues that are like on that, you know, already. Seems like an uphill battle, and it seems like only young teachers would even probably push it. I could be wrong. I mean, but it seems like older.
I think you're wrong. I think
so.
Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people in their 40s who are not super young anymore that have, you know, that are working and learning this summer and trying to, you know, figure some stuff out that they maybe should have figured out 3 years ago or 6 years ago or 9 years ago, but they're working on it this summer, and that's awesome. And so I think you could teach an old dog new tricks sometimes.
You think like the moment that we're in right now is pushing a lot of people to feel like they have to?
Well, definitely yes. So I would back up a tick and just say I think the moment's making a lot of people feel like they want to. So I think there's like a critical mass of people that wanted to learn something or figure something out. I mean that. I think if you go back to May 29th or 28th or whatever night, the riots, the protests turned to riots, like kind of for real. I think in Atlanta it was May 28th. For y'all, it was probably a couple of days earlier. I think the reaction to a whole lot of white people was like typical anger, like lock them up. That I'm not talking about those people, but I think there's a whole set of white people that heard that Baldwin or MLK quote or whatever, that it's one of them, and they quote the other, the riots are the language of the unheard, and somebody quoted that quote to them, and Trevor Noah said it, and that went viral, and then they came out of that moment and did want to learn something. I think they wanted to, and then I think you're right. I think that led to this like snowball that you could almost see happening on all the socials, where it was just people that seemed genuine, and then all of a sudden it felt obligatory. Like everybody's like, oh yeah, I got that book too. Oh yeah, I ordered it. Oh yeah, here I am. Click, you know. So somewhere between like that initial rush of want to, and then the obligatory a week later when Uber sent me an email telling me how committed they were to racial justice, somewhere in between it kind of slipped into performative, right?
You know, I'm going to say that because I have so many folks that I'm connected to on Instagram, I did see more than one or two pictures of a teacher with legs kicked up, and the pictures of like a small stack of books and a cup of coffee or something. Yeah. And in the small stack is either like White Fragility or How to Be an Anti-Racist or like one of those books. So it very much does look like the emblem, like I'm doing my work. I think McWhorter, what he said in his piece when he was ragging on the book was part of what you're saying about it being performative, and him thinking that you would read it and think you did your work then, like, you know, by reading it, you did your work. and that you would make it about individuals and not about systems.
Yeah.
So like, I individually did my work, so we must be good, but the system is still the same.
But
right?
You know what? I read that quote from him today. And then I read, can I read you something?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a book, this is called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And it's this British writer named Rennie Edo-Lodge, and she's black, and because it would be a weird book, I guess, if it was a white person. Right. But she had a great quote towards the end of this book, and she's kind of like, the last chapter is kind of a rallying, like, what can we do? Like what can we do? And there's some really good stuff in here, but she says this, and this speaks to the McWhorter thing. She said, structures are made out of people. When we talk about structural racism, we are talking about the intensification of personal prejudices. It is rife, but rather than deeming the current situation an absolute tragedy, we should seize it as an opportunity to move towards a collective responsibility for a better society. Mm-hmm. And what she means by that is, yeah, sometimes we do throw up our hands and say, oh, it's structural racism, but the structure is people. And so if enough people can kick up their heels and really read those books with their coffee this summer, and like, structures can change because they're driven by people. And I thought it was a really like marginally hopeful thing to think about.
Well, I kind of agree. I mean, I thought that with McWhorter's, the quote that I just said, when he said about, it being about individuals being better, but not really changing the systems, I thought to myself, like, what you just said is true. Yeah. Like, but they're in a system. Like a system isn't anything but the people in it, really, right? Like, doing handoffs with each other.
And the question is, what do you do, right? Like, if you read the book and post a picture and put it on your shelf and forget about it, and then 3 years from now you read the next guy's book or next woman's book and it's called White Sadness or whatever, and like, yeah, that's what McWhorter's saying. That's not helpful. Mm-hmm. And I think he's anticipating a lot of that. But the flip to that is, I don't know if there's a moment, and if there's some good literature out there, and if there's some people that are willing to kind of stick their necks out and keep yapping about it, there's a way to turn the ship, totally.
So Educator Barnes has a quote here, which is Shantae Barnes. Hello, Shantae. Thank you for watching. I need white teachers to spend less time. Excuse me. I need white teachers to spend less time getting a perfect picture of themselves and the books that they read to show that they are woke, and more time actually doing the work. And I think in our last conversation, that's where some of this came from with you and I, of like, is all of this racial awakening stuff in these books, couldn't it be like a vacation from actually having to be on the hook for teaching well and being able to be pedagogically sound? And I mean, couldn't you be a teacher who's not very good at teaching, but you see this as your refuge? You're going to go on a journey to like understand how you're racist and understand your students more and their conditions more. But the kind of implicit message in that is that like the reason that the kids aren't learning is because you haven't interrogated yourself enough about race, and maybe not that you don't understand the science of reading. You don't understand the science of mathematics. You're out of field for what you're teaching. Your performance evaluations are not very good, or when they're good, it's because the principal likes you. But maybe it's not that you're racist, because you're racist. You probably are racist. But maybe it's not just because you're racist, because there are some good teachers who are racist. Maybe it's also that you're taking a refuge from learning how to teach.
So I think I read this somewhere. I could not think of who said it, but like somebody called what you said like the tourism of suffering.
What was it again? The tourism of suffering?
Yeah, the tourism of suffering. And I think sometimes white people can get caught up in that. Yeah. We want to visit suffering by reading about it, and we'll read about slavery and Jim Crow, and we'll read about the redlining and the racial wealth gap, and then but then it doesn't do much for us. It doesn't change us. It doesn't do anything about us. It's just kind of like we're watching it on TV. It's just like, oh, interesting. So I think that's a bad outcome, and one not to be desired and to be pushed back on. If you're a white person and a white person that seems to be sucked into that, you should help them snap out. But what you're saying is, of course, true. Like, it doesn't. I mean, how many? I heard y'all talking about this a couple of weeks ago on 8 Black Hands. You were talking about, and you got really into the weeds about like whether a teacher needed to be liked or respected, or there was another word. You know, we're kind of going back and forth about like what was the best like thing. And the best thing is, of course, all of them. You want the teacher to be liked and respected, and whatever the third word was. But somebody said, and they're right. Like, yeah, you're going to choose to respect over like, right? But to loop that back to here, like, yeah, like it doesn't matter if the kid, if you're respected and liked because you're funny and you've got good skills and you're woke and you're saying the right things at the right times. If you don't know the math, I mean, we're riddled. I can speak to math. You bring up reading a lot. That's not really my thing. But I can speak to the legion of math teachers out there that only know one way to solve a problem. And if a kid asks a question about a different way, they get really flustered, and it's not a great way to run a class. It doesn't matter how well liked you are, to bring back to y'all's point there. It doesn't matter how well liked you are if you don't know your content. So sure, this isn't going to fix that. White fragility won't fix that.
No, and I'm because you said that McWhorter said that white fragility is racist in some ways. He actually called a book about anti-racism racist. Yeah, which I don't fully. Did you have your mind around what he was getting at, like with that critique?
I remember today, he said he was on NPR yesterday. That's what I read. So the Atlantic article was like last week. We were talking about, you and I. I mean, just texting about it. He was on NPR yesterday. Basically, all I remember is he said it was something about, he called it, and I don't want to get this wrong, but it was something like it was dehumanizing to Black people because it's so centered white people.
It felt like he was saying because you're considering Black people not capable of handling some things that they just be able to handle. Yeah. Which I think is why John and I are not on the same page, because I think John is a professional race refuter. Like his entire job in the world, like the difference between a Black conservative and a conservative who happens to be Black. I keep making this distinction for people so that they understand. A Black conservative is interested in preserving the things that Black people that have worked for Black people specifically throughout our time, our heritage, the things that we're proud of, the education, the science that we've contributed to, our history, those things. A Black conservative is interested in preserving those things. So he's Black first, and then a conservator, I'll put it that way. A Black conservator is what a Black conservative is to me. A conservative who happens to be Black is somebody who prioritizes being in with white conservatives, and their Blackness is secondary. And the role that they often play for white conservatives is they refute racism as a profession. Like they're professional race refuters is what they do, and that's their position.
They're like pinch hitters. They got a specific job in the lineup, and
they're like mandingos in that, like you shoot out Candace Owens or the Diamond Silk and Larry Elder and any of these other folks, and they jump out there and say there's no such thing as police brutality. There's no such thing, and they'll have the numbers and the statistics, and they'll sound ridiculous.
And as a white person who talks to a lot of other white people who don't necessarily believe in race and racism, those stats are quoted ad nauseum. I mean, they make it in like one, I'm not even going to name a publication, but like one conservative publication. I'm not talking about Breitbart or anything. I'm talking about like a kind of mainstream conservative publication will cite one article about how slavery wasn't really all that important to the American economy, but you will see that everywhere when you're talking to white deniers. They'll just be like, oh, look, slavery didn't matter. Like, and
they're doing that now with this book. Like when I was looking up, knowing that you and I were going to talk about this, I was looking up white fragility, and I watched a few things with the author. I watched some interviews. But if you go through YouTube looking for this book and looking at a few of her interviews, the more you tread into the more deep you get into it after you've watched a few, you start seeing ones pop up. White fragility destroyed. And it'll annihilated, and it'll be some person right of center who's just destroying white fragility as a premise. That it's very threatening to people. The concept of white privilege, the concept that white people might have some self-interrogation to do about race. That's a very threatening concept. And I can't imagine that it's just in the general public. I'm sure it's in the teaching force too. I think sometimes we think of all teachers as being blue, and there are a lot of red teachers too, by the way. I mean, we should be real about that.
Red teachers in blue areas too. We're not just calling out like some red state.
Rural area,
we're talking about like here in Atlanta, all over the place, red teachers. It's a real. I mean, and so this did get me something. I think it was McWhorter that said this, but I can't remember. Oh no, I was reading. There's a Lauren Jackson. It's not like can't be Lauren Michael Jackson. Anyway,
that would be a great name.
her name is Lauren Jackson. She wrote a really good article about white fragility for Slate last year. She went and actually went to one of D'Angelo's training sessions and like actually partook in the training session and like then got to interview D'Angelo. And she wrote a really good thing about it was kind of even handed. It was like she likes the book fine, but she's not sure how much it's going to do. She thinks D'Angelo is great, but not sure quite what this is all about. But she said, there was something really funny she said, and this is, and I see this all the time, is that so white people like this is like their third rail sometimes, is like to even like suggest that race played any shaping in America after about 1865 is like really, really anathematic to white people. I mean, we really, like most of us hate it, like because if you go past 1865, we don't know where to stop, right? Well, that's the date. We just put it there. Like 1865, everything's been fine since then. I was talking to somebody yesterday. I was twittering with somebody yesterday. I don't want to put too much on our conversation, but it became really clear to me that this person just like could not just denied the fact that race mattered, right? And one funny thing that Lauren Jackson pointed out in her article is that white fragility kind of gets in this like circular loop where if some white person acts a certain kind of way and says, well, that doesn't even make sense, you can just accuse them of white fragility, and then they can go, well, I don't know that I even understand that. You can go, see, you have white fragility. Like it's its own explanation.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly super helpful in conversation when we do that.
To just call out someone's white privilege. I mean, I say to people on Twitter sometimes, enjoy your privilege. Like when I'm done with a conversation and I see that a person's like, as white as they want to be and have no interest in kind of like giving a little that they might be part of the problem, enjoy your privilege. But I'm sure that they're thinking, I don't have any privilege. I worked very hard for what I have. My parents worked very hard, to have what we have. And my ancestors came here from Ireland. We didn't even have anything to do with slaves or slavery and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like, man, if you're thinking that small, don't teach my kids. Don't become a teacher, because if your grandparents came here as Irish immigrants after slavery and everything was done, and that's your reckoning for the past, I'm going to tell you that you came from a country that had nothing to a country that had a full-ass economy that was built by Black people before you got here, and you bought in with $0. You like walked right in, you got off a boat and walked into a booming ass economy with zero buy-in. You didn't have to buy in at all. The investors that were here already who didn't get paid yet actually made that full ass economy that people came in. And now your ancestors are telling me, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. Slavery was a long time ago. My folks weren't even slaves. Yeah, all that stuff. No, I'm sure it's not. This would be a different program if I thought it was you, but it is, I think, indicative to me that everybody's looking to get off the hook somehow.
Well, and there's two things in what you just said. One is that there's again, because of the kind of conservative historian, like the pinch hitters they pull out every once in a while, there is a certain shockingly large subset of white people that like will cogently argue with you that slavery didn't really produce all that much wealth, and that America really did a great thing being getting rid of slavery when it did, and that Reconstruction wasn't as bad as all that. I mean, like there's a whole like counter narrative of history. It's crazy, but a lot of people really buy into it because that's how like touched they are to think that they might be implicated in this story, they have to believe it almost. It's like they're compelled to believe this ridiculous story that 244 years of free labor didn't build wealth for anybody. No.
I believe that that's like fine in the general population, but the idea that that would be in a person who educates other people for a living daily, like educates children daily, and is that misguided on the history of their own country? I mean, God forbid that be a social studies teacher.
So let's just hope and assume that's not that's like that's Trump's base, deep base, the base that's never going to abandon him no matter what. But so you talked about the Irish, right? And the height of the Irish immigration, 1890s, 1910s, those dates aren't rolling off my tongue, but 120, 130 years ago. I think I represent a pretty good like American story in terms of plausible deniability, because both of my grandparents, my father's father and my mother's father, were both born into poverty. One of my grandfathers was a farm boy, and my other grandfather was the son of a coal miner, and they both married people who didn't have a lot of money and had my parents, and ipso facto, voila, here I am. And what I think that so many white people's story now is not just that, I can't connect to antebellum Atlanta, which of course I can't. But it's not even about like being Irish or being Italian or anything like that. It's just about like, I don't know. My grandparents were poor, middle class or blah, blah, blah. And we totally skip over all the wealth creation in the 20th century with the Social Security and the New Deal and the GI Bill and the redlining.
Bill, housing,
all that stuff. Yeah. That did benefit my grandparents and created a wealth for them that trickled down to my parents. And at some point might trickle down to me. They're all alive spending their money somewhere, but it's not a lot of wealth, Chris. I don't want you to get excited. But
Jay is rich.
I am not. but if you talk about the single greatest place, the single biggest place Americans store their wealth is where? Their house, right? And so the GI Bill just systematically built wealth for white people, and redlining systematically helped build wealth for white people, and they both discriminated against black people, and that's all happened in my life to my grandparents, right?
Yeah. There's a great book, I think, is called, it's either When Welfare Was White or When Affirmative Action Was White, or whatever. It's an old book. But I think it talks about all those ways in which the government invested in white people that were unearned benefits, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. So we're going to wrap soon. This is invigorating for me because, I have my position, and listen, I play it well, and I don't suffer fools lightly. On the other side, and sometimes I think to myself, well, maybe I should try and see the humanity in the person that I'm just like destroying, and I'm not really destroying people. Anybody watching or listening, it's not that serious. But I'm fascinated by the idea that we are still teaching and learning the people who are going to teach us to learn the things that they need to be able to do a good job. And I don't know how. So you've told me before how long you've been teaching, but there's already been different waves in time. There was like the Peggy McIntosh stuff, like the invisible knapsack or whatever it is, backpack.
Yeah, unpacking the invisible backpack.
Backpack. Yeah, and that was circulating 10, 15, maybe even longer years ago. There's
that was the 90s.
That was 90s. So and there's stuff like Beyond the Bake Sale, and then there was the Ruby Payne stuff. And now it's getting more sophisticated, how to be an anti-racist, white fragility. And it just makes me think we might be spinning that wheel for a long time. And maybe in the short time, we just teach people how to teach. I keep going back to that. I know it's I don't know where else to land, because I don't know how fast we're going to get to fully self-interrogated white people.
So there's, I would say two things to that as a kind of a wrap, is that one, there's not much excuse for any white person over the age of about 18 right now to have, and I'll give you any teacher right now, or soon to be teacher, is 22 or 23 years old, and they were all around in 2016 when Philando Castile was killed on camera and Donald Trump was elected. They were all in high school when Michael Brown and Black Lives Matter started. Some of that was on camera too. I think Walter Scott was in 2016. You don't have to go back too much further than that to get to Trayvon Martin. There's not so you're right to be suspect that this moment is somehow different, and we're all actually going to like go out and do it, because we could have done it 4 years ago. We could have done it 6 years ago. We could have done it 10 years ago. So that admission that there's not an excuse for that, and we've collectively blown it, is there. However, we're in an interesting time, right? I mean, like we've got a whole economic system that seems to be, I'm not sure it's going to collapse, but it's certainly teeter-tottering. And we have a president, I was trying to think what to call him. We have a president who's strange, has some strange behaviors, and we have an election coming up. And I don't know. I don't know. I trust in the hope to sort of move through that, to say, yeah, there's not an excuse. We should have done this already. You're right to be a suspect. But then to also say, like, I don't know, Chris, if like, I really mean it. Like if half the people that have read White Fragility, like, go and act on that in some way in their space and then spread it, like there's power there. And can I read you another quote?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this isn't from White Fragility. This is a different book.
This is the British author that doesn't talk to white people about race.
Okay. Except
she wrote a great book about it. And she says, this is in her chapter where she's talking about, she's the one that said structures are made of people. And so there's hope there, right? And she said, the perverse thing about our current racial structure is that it falls on the shoulders of those at the bottom to change it. Yet racism is a white problem. It reveals the anxieties, hypocrisies, and double standards of whiteness. It is a problem in the psyche of whiteness that white people must take responsibility to solve. We can only do so much from the outside. And a few pages back, she says, she's talking straight at me. She says, white people, you need to talk to other white people about race. You may be written off as radical, but you have less to lose than I do. You have to talk to other white people who trust you. You have to talk to white people in the areas of your life where you feel influenced. If you feel burdened by your unearned privilege, you have to use it for something and use it where it counts. But you can't be anti-racist for the sake of an audience. You can't be anti-racist in your private you have to be anti-racist in your private and professional life where there's very little praise to be found. That's more difficult, but ultimately more meaningful. And that's the hope to me. It's not that all these teachers that read White Fragility are going to go like lead a book club and put that on Facebook, because that's public life, but that they're going to go like find somebody in their building, or find a family member or a close friend, and they're going to go be anti-racist in that private or professional life in a way that's hidden, right? Not in a public way that's gonna get them likes or clicks, but in a way that's just going to be hidden but matter to that other person, and that can multiply real fast. And I think we might be in a moment. That's what I'm going to say.
Right. I'm going to give you that, but I feel real funny about it. I feel like that person is going to go to work tomorrow and find somebody and is going to be like, Diane, can I talk to you? And be like, sure. What do you want to talk about? Diane, we're racist. Girl, what? Oh, yeah, we racist as hell. Girl, where'd you hear that? I got a book. I mean, like, end scene. I don't know how to play that one out. Like, what I imagine is what I just did is the best case scenario, but the worst case scenario is I bet you I can pull from my own network more than one teacher that has tried to start courageous conversations at school and got shut down, shut out by colleagues and peers, and felt really deflated about it. And I bet you that person's younger in there, and they're probably more into being an ally. But I'm gonna end with what you gave us, and appreciate it. And our next time, for people watching this has been like a pilot episode of White Noise. that came out of our last discussion, and I asked you if you would come back, and you were gracious enough to say yes. So this will be a bi-weekly thing. So if anybody watching has resources or articles, books, or anything that you think that we should pay attention to that is germane to this topic, white noise, and the conversation that we should be having that would make us more informed, send it to me at christopher@activist.com or put it in the comments, and we'll take a look at it. Jay and I, as we're talking, I'm sure not able to see all of the comments. I saw some go by. I will say this at the end. This is a point for me to understand more of the white educator side of things. And a lot of my Black folks are in the comments or whatnot. So I'm hoping that you all are okay with us having like step back a little bit and just be a little bit of an audience to the other side. Yeah, I think that's the right thing to do right now.
But I would say, just to tack on that like white, that means like, the teachers are 80% white, but the students are 52% not, right? So you're like calling yourself an audience is not that, that's not the right word, right? I mean, like I'm not sure the word consumer is the right word, but what is the word you like to use about your child? Like your child, like the $1 million child or whatever, like, as the parent, you're the guardian shepherd. What's the word? You use a word. I can't remember what it is.
I don't know what it is, but I'll say this much about the audience thing, being in an audience thing. It's kind of to the title of that book a little bit, like why I'm sick of talking to white people about race.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that it's cathartic for me to talk to you is I feel like I can just ask you the questions and whatever, and we can it'll be fine. And wherever we go with it, it'll be fine. But I am fatigued and tired of talking with white people about race when I don't feel like they're ready for an honest discussion about it. And when I don't think that they're ready to challenge each other. They're not willing to challenge their colleagues, not willing to challenge each other, their family members. The classic thing that Black people and people of color will hear from white friends a lot is, oh my God, you won't believe what my uncle said over Thanksgiving dinner and blah, blah, blah. And, they're telling you a story about like how they're so aggravated by what was said, something totally racist. And your only question in that moment is like, and then what did you say?
What did you do? Right.
Yeah. What did you do? And the answer to that a lot of times is, you know what? I mean, it's not worth it. Like, he's going to be the way that he is. And, didn't want to ruin the dinner. And
I have been there with the meek, like pull back and not say anything. And I've been there and ruined the dinner. And like, I try to ruin more dinners than not at this point. But I've definitely like shirked back from it. Part of what that does for us white people is, I was thinking this when you said it gives us cover. Like when that's why we love those, you wouldn't believe what my uncle said, because we tell those stories to each other, and they're almost like there are myths that, I mean, they're true, but they're the myths that like make us feel better, right? Oh, my uncle said this and I would never say that. And oh, my friend's uncle said this and I would never say that. And it just goes around and builds up this myth of the like good white person, right?
Yeah. Well, we're all above TikTok age, but I'm not above TikTok. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to watch. It's quick, fast entertainment. And there's a whole chain of like white kids addressing their racist parents. And they're actually recording their parents having super racist discussions, and they're challenging their parents. They're like, Mom, that is not okay. You can't be saying it. So
it feels real. Like it doesn't.
Oh no, it's very real. Like it's somewhat of a viral thing that has taken place, especially since the George Floyd outcomes, like everything after the protests and all of that. And they're taking to TikTok and they're secretly recording their parents saying very racist things, and they're confronting them. In some cases, they're even crying, like, I can't believe you're this racist. I can't believe. And their parents are just pushing back, like, you're just young and stupid and you don't know what you're talking about and whatever. But at least you see that they're popularizing the idea of just going all in and challenging whoever it is. And it's real. You might be above the TikTok age too, like me, but I'm telling you, it's entertaining.
Well, you have kids that age, don't you?
Yes, they're all TikTok kids. Yeah. And the reason that we look at most platforms is probably because our kids are engaging in them and we want to know what's going on there. So Well, everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. If you have other white educators that you think you could invite to listen to this and participate and add comments, please do so. Share it with others. I think I might be, looking for, since we're going to do this bi-weekly, looking for someone who's on the off week who might be willing to come in and pinch hit if we get enough response, we get enough people calling in. So hopefully that's all right with you, sir.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. Well, Jay, thank you. I appreciate this. This has been great.
Yeah, Chris, it was wonderful.
And bye to everybody.